January 26, 1945. 14:20 hours. Holtzwihr, France. Obergefreiter Klaus Dietrich, 22 years old from Hamburg, pressed himself against the frozen ground as another burst of machine gun fire ripped through the air above his head. Around him, what remained of his company, the 2nd Mountain Division's 3rd Battalion, lay scattered across the snow-covered field. They had started the attack 1 hour ago with 250 men and 6 Panzer IV tanks. Now, Dietrich counted maybe 70 soldiers, still moving, still alive. The tanks were gone, all 6 of them, burning hulks that had been knocked out not by anti-tank guns or bazookas, but by American artillery called in by one man, one American officer standing on top of a burning tank destroyer, completely exposed, firing a single machine gun. Dietrich had served on the Eastern Front. He had survived Stalingrad. He thought he had seen everything modern warfare could offer. He was wrong. The weapon that had destroyed his company in less than an hour was not a secret wonderwaff. It was not some technological marvel born in American laboratories. It was a machine gun that had first entered service in 1933, 12 years before this January afternoon in Alsace. A weapon so simple, so reliable, that American factories had produced nearly 2 million of them. A weapon the Germans had initially dismissed as crude and unsophisticated. The Browning M2.50 caliber heavy machine gun. The American firing. It was First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, 20 years old from Kingston, Texas. Murphy had already earned the Distinguished Service Cross, 2 Silver Stars, and a Legion of Merit in 60 minutes, standing completely exposed on a burning M10 tank destroyer. He would earn the Medal of Honor. The citation, signed by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, would confirm that Murphy personally inflicted approximately 50 casualties on the attacking German force, using only the tank destroyer's turret-mounted .50 caliber machine gun. But Murphy's action at Holtzwihr was not unique. It was simply the most dramatic example of a pattern that had emerged across every theater where German forces encountered American troops. From the hedgerows of Normandy to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, from the deserts of North Africa to the skies over the Reich itself, German soldiers had learned to recognize and fear a distinctive sound, the deep, rhythmic thunder of the M2 Browning, 450 to 575 rounds per minute. Each massive half-inch diameter projectile weighing 707 grains, traveling at 2,910 feet per second, carrying 12,000 foot-pounds of muzzle energy, enough kinetic force to punch through light armor, tear through concrete walls, and turn human bodies into catastrophic trauma cases that field hospitals could do little to save. The medical impact of .50 caliber wounds became grimly familiar to German medical personnel throughout the war. Unlike rifle rounds that might wound and allow recovery, .50 caliber projectiles caused catastrophic tissue damage. The massive kinetic energy transfer meant that a hit to a limb often resulted in amputation or permanent disability. A hit to the torso was almost invariably fatal. The hydrostatic shock from a near miss could cause internal injuries even without direct impact. Oberar's Heinrich Müller, 34 years old from Berlin, served as a medical officer with the 352nd Infantry Division in Normandy. After his capture in August 1944, his interrogation included detailed discussions of wound patterns. His testimony provides one of the most complete medical assessments of .50 caliber casualties from the German perspective. In my 3 years as a military surgeon, I had treated wounds from every type of weapon: rifle bullets, machine gun fire, artillery fragments, even flamethrowers. The .50 caliber wounds were different. The entry wound might be relatively small, but the exit wound, if there was an exit wound, could be the size of a fist or larger. The projectile created a temporary wound cavity many times larger than the bullet diameter. Internal organs would be liquefied by the hydrostatic shock. Bones would not just break, but shatter into dozens of fragments. What made these wounds particularly challenging was that soldiers who survived the initial impact often could not be saved. The tissue destruction was so extensive that even immediate surgery could not repair the damage. We learned to recognize .50 caliber casualties by the nature of their wounds and the rapidity of their deterioration. Many died within minutes despite our best efforts. Those who survived to reach field hospitals often required multiple amputations. I estimate that fewer than 30% of soldiers with torso wounds from .50 caliber fire survived more than 1 hour, even with immediate medical intervention. The psychological impact extended beyond direct casualties. German units that came under sustained .50 caliber fire suffered combat exhaustion and breakdown of unit cohesion at rates significantly higher than units that faced conventional small arms fire. Medical officers noted that soldiers who had been subjected to repeated .50 caliber attacks, even when not physically wounded, showed signs of severe stress and combat fatigue that required evacuation from frontline service. If this kind of in-depth military history breakdown is your thing, the real accounts from soldiers who faced these weapons, the tactical details that changed how wars were fought, hit that subscribe button now. It really helps us keep bringing you these untold stories from World War II and beyond. All right, let's get into how a machine gun designed in 1917 became the most feared weapon in the American arsenal, and why German soldiers who faced it came to hate everything it represented about American industrial warfare. The transformation from skepticism to terror had begun years earlier, and not against American forces, but against the British. November 8, 1942, 2 o'clock hours. El Alamein, Egypt. Hauptmann Ernst Gunther Baader, 28 years old from Hanover, commanded a company in the 15th Panzer Division under General Feldmarschall Erwin Rommel. The Afrika Korps had been fighting British and Commonwealth forces in North Africa for nearly 2 years. Baader's men were veterans, hard, experienced soldiers who had adapted to desert warfare and respected their British opponents' fighting qualities. But in November 1942, something changed. The British had begun receiving large quantities of American equipment through Lend-Lease, including thousands of M2 Browning .50 caliber machine guns. British doctrine rapidly incorporated these weapons into their defensive positions, vehicle mounts, and anti-aircraft batteries. During the German withdrawal from El Alamein, Baader's company attempted a night infiltration to delay British pursuit. At 2 o'clock hours, his lead elements encountered a British defensive position they had not identified in reconnaissance. What happened next would be repeated thousands of times over the next 3 years as German forces learned what the .50 caliber could do. The British position erupted with fire, not the relatively light fire of .303 Bren guns or even the heavier .50-inch Vickers machine guns the Germans had faced before, but something far more devastating. Tracers arced across the desert night. The sound was different, deeper, more resonant than any machine gun fire the Germans had previously encountered. Baader's company took 40% casualties in less than 10 minutes. The survivors pulled back in disorder. In his post-war memoir, published in 1951, Baader described the engagement. We had faced British machine gun positions many times. We knew their tactics, their weapons, their capabilities. This was different. The volume of fire was unprecedented. The tracers, every fifth round glowing like small meteors, showed that they were firing in sustained bursts that would have exhausted the ammunition supply of any German or British weapon we had encountered. But they never stopped. The fire was continuous, disciplined, aimed. When we recovered our casualties at dawn, I saw wounds I had never seen before. Men hit in the legs had their femurs shattered into fragments. Men hit in the arms lost the entire limb. One soldier had been hit in the shoulder, and the round had traveled through his torso and exited through his hip. He lived for 3 hours in unimaginable agony before dying. Our medical officer told me he had seen similar wounds from anti-tank rifle fire, but never from a machine gun. I reported to my battalion commander that the British had deployed a new weapon, possibly a 20mm automatic cannon. Later, we captured a British position and found the weapons, .50 caliber Browning machine guns, American-made, supplied in vast quantities through Lend-Lease. We examined them carefully. Simple construction, air-cooled, fed from disintegrating link belts. Each position had thousands of rounds of ammunition. The British had learned what the Americans would later demonstrate across Europe, that this weapon, properly supplied and employed, could dominate the battlefield. The Africa campaign provided the first sustained exposure of German forces to the .50 caliber, though most German soldiers did not yet understand what they were facing. That understanding would come later, in Sicily and Italy, and finally in Normandy, where the full weight of American industrial production and firepower doctrine would be revealed. But even in North Africa, patterns were emerging. The .50 caliber was reliable in desert conditions that caused other weapons to jam from sand and heat. It could engage targets at ranges that made return fire difficult. It could penetrate the armor of German armor cars and half-tracks. And most importantly, it was supplied with ammunition in quantities that allowed continuous fire for hours. German officers analyzing the North Africa campaign noted these factors in their after-action reports, but few appreciated the significance. They assumed the British employment of .50 caliber machine guns was an anomaly, a temporary advantage that would fade as the war progressed. They were catastrophically wrong. September 6, 1943. The skies over Stuttgart, Germany. Lieutenant Heinrich Wormhela, 24 years old from Munich, rolled his Focke-Wulf 190 into an attack dive from 8,000 meters. Below him, 388 B-17 flying fortresses droned toward Stuttgart's industrial district in the first major American daylight raid on city. Wormhela was an ace with 93 confirmed victories. He had fought in the Battle of Britain, over the Eastern Front, and across the Mediterranean. He was confident in his aircraft, for 20mm cannons and two 13mm machine guns, and in his skills. At 800 meters, Wormhela opened fire. His cannons thundered. Shells streaked toward the lead bombers. Then the sky erupted. Each B-17 carried 13 Browning M2 machine guns. A formation of 36 bombers meant 468 heavy machine guns, all firing the same .50 caliber cartridge that could reach out to 1,830 meters with lethal effect. The combined defensive firepower exceeded 6,000 rounds per minute, creating what Allied planners call a zone of mutual support. What German pilots experienced as a wall of steel that no fighter could safely penetrate. Wormhela felt his FW190 shudder violently. A .50 caliber round tore through his left wing, destroying the aileron control cables. Another punched through the engine cowling, severing an oil line. A third round struck his armored headrest and ricocheted into the canopy frame, spider-webbing the plexiglass inches from his face. Hydraulic fluid sprayed across his canopy. He broke off the attack, diving away with his aircraft trailing smoke and oil, struggling to maintain control with damaged flight surfaces and a dying engine. He coaxed his crippled FW-190 back to bobbling an airfield, landing with no hydraulics and minimal control authority. When ground crew examined his aircraft, they counted 23.50 caliber strikes. 7 had hit critical systems. Any one of a dozen other hits could have been fatal if they had struck slightly differently. Wormhela survived. Many of his squadron did not. The Stuttgart raid cost the Americans 45 B-17s, a loss rate of 11.6% that was unsustainable for long-term operations. But the Luftwaffe lost something irreplaceable: experienced pilots. Wormhela's Jägerschwadron lost 9 pilots that day, men with an average of 40 combat missions each, men who had survived years of fighting and could not be replaced with the green recruits now filling Luftwaffe training units. What Wormhela and his fellow pilots did not yet understand was that they were encountering not just a weapon, but an entirely different philosophy of warfare. The Germans had built their air force around precision. Skilled pilots flying sophisticated aircraft armed with powerful cannons that could destroy bombers with well-placed shots. The Americans had solved the problem differently, not through precision, but through overwhelming volume. Each B-17G carried between 5,000 and 7,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition distributed across 13 gun positions. Some crews added extra ammunition beyond regulations, stuffing additional cans wherever they could find space in the aircraft. The philosophy was simple: if you put enough bullets in the air, some of them will hit. And .50 caliber bullets, even without explosive charges, would do catastrophic damage when they hit. By October 1943, Luftwaffe fighter units had begun to understand the true danger. The Americans were not just flying occasional raids. They were coming every day that weather permitted, in formations of hundreds of bombers, each one carrying 13.50 caliber machine guns operated by gunners who had been trained specifically for defensive fire against fighter attacks. Wormhela would survive the war. In his post-war debriefings with American intelligence officers in March 1946, he described what German fighter pilots came to understand about the American bombers. We call them Die Fliegenden Festungen, the flying fortresses. But what made them true fortresses was not their armor or their formation discipline. It was those .50 caliber machine guns that never stopped firing, never jammed, never gave us an opening. We lost so many pilots not to American fighters, but to the bomber defensive fire. It was like flying into a meat grinder. You see the tracers, 1 round in 5, and you know that for every tracer you see, for more bullets you cannot see are flying past your canopy. The tracers show you the path of the fire, but they do not show you the density. When you close to effective cannon range, 400 to 500 meters, you are already inside their maximum killing zone. They have been firing at you since 1,500 meters. You have been flying through hundreds of rounds before you even pull the trigger. Our cannons were powerful. A single 20 millimeters hit could destroy a bomber's engine or blow off a control surface. But our cannons jammed. The 108 Malawian Quach's 30mm cannon, which could destroy a bomber with 3 or 4 hits, jammed constantly and had terrible ballistics. The American .50 caliber simply worked. It fired continuously. It did not jam. It did not overheat and seize. It functioned at altitude where temperatures dropped to minus 40 degrees Celsius. The barrels glowed red from sustained fire, and still they kept shooting. German fighter tactics evolved rapidly in response to the American bomber formations. Luftwaffe tacticians tried every approach they could conceive. Head-on attacks diving from high altitude to minimize exposure time in the defensive fire zone. Attacks from directly astern, accepting the concentrated fire from tail gunners in exchange for a stable firing position. Attacks from below, where the ball turret's limited traverse gave attackers brief windows of opportunity. Attacks from above with rocket projectiles to strike from outside .50 caliber range. Nothing worked consistently. The American gunners had overlapping fields of fire, carefully designed into the bomber's defensive layout. Attack from ahead, and the nose guns and top turret would engage. From behind, the tail guns and ball turret. From the sides, the waist guns. From above or below, the ball turret and top turret could traverse to meet the threat. The combat box formations, 18 to 21 aircraft arranged in three-dimensional space, were specifically designed to maximize overlapping defensive fire between aircraft. There was no safe approach angle. Lieutenant Wolfgang Fischer, 26 years old from Berlin, flew Bf-109G fighters in JJ-88, defending the Reich against American daylight raids. He survived 127 combat missions before being shot down over Hamburg in July 1944. Wounded but alive, he was captured when British forces overran his field hospital in September. In his post-war testimony, Fischer described what German pilots learned to fear more than American fighters or flak. Our 20mm MG-151 cannons were powerful weapons, but they jammed frequently, especially in the cold air high altitude, where moisture could freeze in the mechanisms. The MG-131 13mm machine gun was more reliable, but still required careful maintenance and would fail at critical moments. Failures were not rare. They were expected. A pilot attacking a bomber formation knew there was perhaps a 30% chance his cannons would jam during the engagement. The American Browning simply worked. Every time. We never, not once in over 100 missions, saw a bomber's defensive fire cease because of mechanical failure. They fired continuously for the entire engagement. They operated in temperatures ranging from minus 40 degrees to the heat of the lower altitudes. They functioned after being hit by our cannon fire. We saw bombers with obvious battle damage, engines smoking, pieces of the fuselage torn away, and their machine guns would still be firing. Their maintenance crews would replace overheated barrels during the flight. We could see gunners pulling barrels and installing new ones while under attack. The gun would be firing again within 30 seconds. Our maintenance crews needed hours in a heated hangar to clear a serious jam or replace damaged components. The Americans did field maintenance at 7,000 meters under combat conditions. We could not compete with that reliability. Our tactics, our training, our courage, none of it mattered when their guns worked every time, and ours did not. The mathematics were brutal. In a 5-minute engagement, an American bomber might fire 500 rounds from his position. A German fighter pilot might get 3 or 4 bursts totaling 50 rounds before his cannons jammed or his ammunition was exhausted. Volume defeated precision, reliability defeated sophistication, and industrial production defeated tactical excellence. The statistics bore out Fischer's assessment. The United States Strategic Bombing Survey, conducted after the war, analyzed thousands of combat reports and loss records. The findings were stark. From June 1943 through March 1944, German fighter losses to bomber defensive fire exceeded losses to American fighter escorts. Even after long-range P-51 Mustangs began accompanying bombers deep into Germany in early 1944, bomber defensive fire continued to inflict 30 to 40% of total Luftwaffe fighter losses on daylight missions. The psychological impact on Luftwaffe fighter units was severe and cumulative. Young pilots joining units in late 1943 and 1944 received dire warnings from surviving veterans. Never close to less than 400 meters, never attack from astern, never make more than one pass, never assume a bomber is defenseless even if it appears damaged. The bombers were flying fortresses not because of their armor, but because of their .50 caliber machine guns. By mid-1944, Luftwaffe fighter effectiveness against American daylight raids had collapsed. Losses were unsustainable. Experienced pilots were gone, replaced by poorly trained recruits who lasted an average of 7 combat missions before being shot down. The .50 caliber had not achieved this alone. American fighter escorts and overwhelming numerical superiority played major roles, but the defensive firepower of the bombers made every attack costly and dangerous, grinding down German fighter strength through cumulative attrition. June 6, 1944, 16:30 hours. Normandy, France. Oberstleutnant Hans von Luck, 33 years old from Flensburg, commanded elements of the 21st Panzer Division defending against the Allied invasion. Von Luck was no ordinary officer. He had fought at Alamein under Rommel, earned a Knight's Cross with oak leaves, and would later publish his acclaimed memoir Panzer Commander, one of the most respected German accounts of the war. His division was among the first German units to engage American forces in sustained ground combat on French soil. What von Luck discovered in the Norman hedgerows would fundamentally alter his understanding of modern warfare. American doctrine had placed a .50 caliber machine gun on virtually every combat vehicle. Jeeps mounted them on pedestal mounts. Trucks mounted them on improvised pintles. Half-tracks mounted them on ring mounts or in armored turrets. Tanks mounted them on turret roofs for anti-aircraft defense and infantry suppression. Tank destroyers mounted them for close defense. Even supply vehicles carried them for convoy protection. The Americans had achieved something the Germans had never attempted: universal heavy machine gun coverage across their entire force structure. Von Luck's initial reaction was professional curiosity mixed with tactical disdain. German doctrine organized infantry squads around the machine gun. The excellent MG-34 or its successor, the MG-42, which fire at 1,200 rounds per minute and earned the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw from Allied soldiers who heard its distinctive sound. German squads carried 1,800 rounds per machine gun and organized their tactics around supporting the gun crew. The concept, called Einheitsmaschinenjäger or general-purpose machine gun, was tactically sophisticated. A single weapon could serve as a light machine gun on a bipod for assault operations or as a sustained fire weapon on a tripod for defensive positions. German machine gun crews were highly trained specialists. The weapon was the centerpiece of German infantry tactics. NATO would later adopt this concept because it was fundamentally sound. But the Germans had never imagined the scale of American .50 caliber employment. A single American armored division advancing through France would have hundreds of .50 caliber machine guns mounted on vehicles, not as a main armament, but as secondary weapons for air defense and infantry suppression. American infantry divisions had organic .50 caliber heavy machine gun sections at company and battalion level. Anti-aircraft battalions equipped with M16 quad-mount half-tracks could be repurposed for ground combat, bringing 4.50 caliber machine guns per vehicle to bear on German positions. Von Luck wrote in his memoir about the first time he observed an American armored column moving to the Bocage country south of Cannes. I watched from a concealed observation post as the American column approached. I counted 47 vehicles in the convoy: tanks, tank destroyers, half-tracks, trucks, jeeps, 47 vehicles, and at least 35 of them had heavy machine guns visible on turrets or pintle mounts. They were not moving tactically, not using proper security procedures. They were simply driving down the road, as if on parade, as if they owned the entire country. I ordered my forward elements to prepare an ambush with Panzer IVs teams to engage the American armor at close range. This was standard doctrine that had worked effectively against British and Soviet forces. The Panzer IVs teams would disable the lead vehicles, trap the column, and allow us to destroy the trapped vehicles systematically. When my teams initiated the ambush, destroying the lead Sherman tank, the volume of return fire was incomprehensible. Every American vehicle in the column seemed to have a .50 caliber that opened fire simultaneously. They did not aim carefully or fire disciplined bursts. They simply hosed down the entire tree line with continuous fire. The volume was so intense that my men could not raise their heads to fire second shots with their Panzerfausts. The Americans did not attempt to take cover or withdraw. They simply drove forward, shooting continuously, and my men were forced to retreat without achieving any additional hits on American vehicles. I had 5 casualties from that ambush, including 1 dead. The Americans had 1 disabled tank. The tactical exchange was completely in their favor, and they had achieved it not through superior tactics or training, but through sheer volume of fire from weapons that never seemed to run out of ammunition. American supply convoys employed a documented tactic that German intelligence identified but could never effectively counter: alternating fire pattern. Vehicles on the right side of the convoy would train their .50 caliber machine guns to the right. Vehicles on the left would train their weapons left. When ambushed, the entire convoy would erupt in sustained fire that covered both flanks simultaneously and created intersecting fields of fire that made effective ambush nearly impossible. This was not accidental or improvised. This was doctrine, taught in training, practice in exercises, and executed with mechanical precision in combat. American convoy commanders had specific tables of organization that dictated weapon placement throughout the column. Lead vehicles had .50 calibers for frontal security. Trail vehicles had .50 calibers for rear security. Intermediate vehicles alternated their weapon orientation to cover flanks. The result was that a 50-vehicle American supply convoy might have 30 or more .50 caliber machine guns, all positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire, all supplied with thousands of rounds of ammunition, all operated by soldiers who had been trained to fire immediately and continuously when ambushed. Gefreiter Otto Carius, 21 years old from Zweibrücken, served as a Panzer IV gunner in the 352nd Infantry Division. He survived the Normandy campaign and was captured near Falaise in August 1944. In his interrogation by American intelligence officers, Carius described the evolution of German anti-convoy tactics and their ultimate failure. In the first weeks after the invasion, we positioned ambush teams of 4 or 5 men with Panzer IVs and MG-42 machine guns along roads where American supply convoys traveled. Our doctrine was sound. It had been developed through years of combat experience on the Eastern Front. Wait for the convoy to enter the kill zone, destroy the lead and rear vehicles to trap the convoy, then systematically destroy the trap vehicles with Panzer IVs and machine gun fire. This had worked against British convoys in North Africa and Soviet convoys in Russia. Against the Americans, it failed completely. Their convoys had too many heavy machine guns. When we initiated the ambush by destroying a vehicle with a Panzer IVs, the return fire was immediate and overwhelming. We would destroy perhaps one vehicle, maybe two, and then their .50 calibers would tear apart our positions. We learned very quickly that trees did not provide cover. The .50 caliber rounds would cut through tree trunks 15 or 20 centimeters in diameter. Stone walls that should have stopped rifle fire, and even machine gun fire were penetrated by .50 caliber projectiles. Men died behind cover that had protected German soldiers throughout the war. The projectiles were so massive, carried so much energy, that they defeated cover we had thought was safe. After losing 3 complete ambush teams in 1 week, 17 men dead, 11 wounded, our company commander ordered us to only attack isolated vehicles, never convoys. But isolated vehicles were rare. The Americans moved in strength precisely because they knew we could not effectively attack their convoys. Their logistics were invulnerable to the kind of small unit actions that had disrupted British and Soviet supply lines earlier in the war. American armored columns employed what they called reconnaissance by fire, a tactic that drove German soldiers to distraction. Rather than carefully advancing and waiting for the enemy to reveal positions through fire, American units would fire their .50 caliber machine guns continuously into any suspicious location as they advanced. Tree lines received sustained bursts every 50 meters. Farm buildings received sustained fire, whether occupied or empty. Stone walls received fire. Hedgerows received fire. Any terrain feature that could conceal troops received fire. The volume of fire would either suppress hidden German positions, preventing them from firing effectively, or provoke return fire that revealed their locations to American artillery and air support. Either way, American forces maintained initiative. Unteroffizier Franz Weber, 27 years old from Stuttgart, commanded an MG-42 machine gun squad in the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division. He survived the fighting in the Falaise pocket and was captured by Canadian forces in August 1944. In his debriefing, Weber articulated what many German veterans felt about American tactics. Against the Russians on the Eastern Front, we faced human wave attacks. Thousands of soldiers advancing with minimal fire support, relying on numbers to overwhelm defensive positions. We faced artillery barges that would pulverize entire sectors, turning the ground into a lunar landscape. Those were terrifying, but we understood the tactics. We could anticipate attacks, prepare defensive positions, and use our superior training and equipment to inflict disproportionate casualties. Against the British in Normandy, we faced methodical, carefully planned advances with excellent coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery. The British were cautious, professional, skilled. We could respect that kind of warfare, even as we fought against it. Against the Americans, we faced something entirely different. They simply shot at everything. They fired at shadows. They fired at buildings that might contain troops or might be empty. They fired at hedgerows we were hiding behind, and hedgerows with no one behind them. They fired to suppress positions they suspected existed. They fired because they had unlimited ammunition, and we did not. I kept careful count during one 3-day period in July. My 8-man squad, equipped with one of the finest machine guns in the world, the MG-42, firing 1,200 rounds per minute, fired approximately 4,000 rounds total over those 3 days. We were conserving ammunition because resupply was uncertain. An American platoon in the same sector, I watched them through binoculars, fire what I estimated was 15,000 to 20,000 rounds from their .50 caliber and .30 caliber machine guns in the same period. They fired 10 times as much ammunition to achieve the same tactical objectives. But it worked. We could not move during daylight. We could not reposition our weapon. We could not conduct local counterattacks. We were pinned by continuous fire from weapons that never ran out of ammunition. After 2 weeks fighting the Americans in the bocage, my men would not leave cover during daylight. It was not cowardice. These were veterans who had fought at Kursk, who had faced Soviet attacks across open ground. It was mathematics. Movement meant exposure. Exposure meant coming under .50 caliber fire. And that meant death or catastrophic wounds that would end a soldier's war even if he survived. The M16 multiple gun motor carriage exemplified American firepower philosophy at its most extreme. This was AM3 half-track mounting 4.50 caliber machine guns in a powered Maxim M45 turret, originally designed for anti-aircraft defense against low-flying aircraft. The combined rate of fire approached 2,200 rounds per minute, nearly 37 rounds per second of .50 caliber fire. American soldiers called it the meat chopper or the kraut mower. Both names were earned. Official reports from the 473rd AAA Battalion in November 1944 documented that the M16's primary mission, anti-aircraft defense, had become secondary by late 1944. The Luftwaffe had been largely defeated over Western Europe. American anti-aircraft units found themselves repurposed for ground support operations, and the M16 proved devastatingly effective against German infantry and light vehicles. The technical specifications explained why. For .50 caliber machine guns, each firing 450 to 575 rounds per minute, mounted in a powered turret that could traverse 360 degrees and elevate to engage ground targets. Total ammunition capacity of 2,000 rounds ready to fire, with additional ammunition stored on the vehicle. The turret could be operated manually if power failed, and the weapons could continue firing even if the turret was damaged. During the Battle of the Bulge, when German forces made their last major offensive in the West from December 16, 1944 to January 25, 1945, M16 units were credited with breaking up numerous German infantry attacks simply by traversing their 4-gun mounts across attacking formations. Obergefreiter Helmut Schreiber, 23 years old from Dresden, survived an M16 engagement near Bastogne on December 22, 1944. He was evacuated to a German field hospital with severe leg wounds and captured when American forces overran the hospital on December 26. His medical records and subsequent interrogation provided one of the most detailed German accounts of being under M16 fire. Our company, approximately 120 men from the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, was ordered to attack an American supply depot near a crossroads west of Bastogne. Intelligence told us the depot was defended by logistics troops, not combat infantry. We expected light resistance. We advanced in 3 platoons across open ground at dusk, approximately 200 meters from the American position, when we heard engines starting. I thought they were trying to evacuate their trucks before we overran the position. Then I saw the vehicle, a half-track with what looked like 4 machine guns and a turret. The turret rotated toward us, smooth and fast like it was powered by a motor, and opened fire. I cannot adequately describe what happened next. The sound was like heavy cloth being torn, but magnified 100 times and continuous, never stopping. The entire front rank of our formation simply disappeared, not fell down, but disappeared into red mist. Men were cut down so quickly that many did not have time to drop to the ground or take cover. The tracers, every 5th round glowed like small meteors, created what looked like 4 solid streams of light, sweeping across our company like a broom. I threw myself into a shallow depression in the ground, barely 20 centimeters deep. The fire continued for what seemed like hours, but was probably less than 2 minutes. I felt impacts in the ground near my head. Dirt showered over me. I heard men screaming, short screams that cut off suddenly. When the fire stopped, I looked up and counted 11 men still moving out of my entire platoon of 38 soldiers. Most of the casualties had not been hit once or twice, but multiple times. I saw bodies had been struck by 5, 10, 15 rounds. The weapon had fired so many bullets, so quickly, that men in the kill zone had no chance. The medical officer who treated me at the field hospital said he had never seen wounds like those from that day: massive tissue destruction, bones shattered into fragments, catastrophic blood loss from multiple wound channels. Many wounded never reached the hospital. They bled out in the field in minutes because there was nothing anyone could do. You cannot stop bleeding from 5 or 6.50 caliber wounds. The body just doesn't have enough blood. The terror from the air added another dimension to German fear of the .50 caliber, and was in many ways even more psychologically devastating than ground-based fire. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, which American pilots nicknamed the Jug after its distinctive thick fuselage, carried 8 Browning M2 machine guns in its wings for preside. This meant a single fighter could deliver 4,400 rounds per minute of combined firepower during strafing runs. To put that in perspective, a single P-47 could fire more rounds in 1 minute than an entire German infantry company could fire with all their rifles and machine guns combined in the same period. A flight of 4 P-47s meant 32.50 caliber machine guns converging on a target area, delivering more than 17,000 rounds per minute of sustained fire. German ground forces learned to recognize the distinctive shape of the P-47 and the sound that preceded death, a deep, rumbling thunder that built in intensity as the aircraft dug toward its target, followed by the staccato roar of 8 machine guns firing simultaneously. A strafing run by a flight of 4 P-47s would typically follow a specific pattern. The flight leader would identify the target, a convoy, a troop concentration, an artillery position, and begin his dive from 3,000 to 4,000 meters. The other 3 aircraft would follow and trail, spaced 10 to 15 seconds apart. Each pilot would open fire at 600 to 800 meters range and continue firing as they dove, walking their fire across the target area. The entire engagement might last 30 to 40 seconds from first to last aircraft, but in that time, the 4 P-47s could deliver 2,000 to 3,000 rounds of .50 caliber ammunition into an area the size of a football field. Survivors described the effect as a horizontal rainstorm of metal that left nothing intact. Obergefreiter Johann Becker, 25 years old from Cologne, served as a supply sergeant in the 2nd SS Panzer Division. He survived multiple strafing attacks during the retreat from Normandy in August 1944. His account, given during interrogation after his capture near the German border in September 1944, captured the helplessness German ground troops felt against American air power. You hear the engines first, a deep rumble that grows louder. You have perhaps 5 seconds from when you hear the sound to when they open fire. By the time you look up and identify the aircraft, they are already firing. You can see the muzzle flashes twinkling along the wings. Then you see the tracers, lines of light that seem to float toward you slowly but arrive instantly. The bullets hit the road, the vehicles, the men, all at once. There is no sequence, no pattern that allows you to anticipate where the fire will strike. It is simply everywhere. There is no cover that works. Stone walls crumble under sustained fire. Trees are cut down. I saw an oak tree perhaps 40 centimeters in diameter simply fall over after AP-47 fired into it for 3 or 4 seconds. Metal tears like paper. You can be behind a truck one moment, and the truck is gone the next. Just pieces of burning metal scattered across the road. I learned to abandon vehicles the instant I heard aircraft engines. Better to lose the vehicle than the vehicle and the crew. Some men try to hide under vehicles or behind engine blocks, thinking the metal would protect them. The .50 caliber rounds would penetrate the vehicle from above, ricochet inside the engine compartment, and kill everyone sheltering beneath. One strafing attack hit a truck with 6 men hiding under it. All 6 were killed by ricocheting rounds inside the vehicle's undercarriage. Not one round struck them directly. They were killed by fragments and ricochets. The safest option was to run. Sprint away from any vehicle or equipment that might draw fire. Throw yourself into a ditch or a crater. Press your face into dirt and pray the pilots did not see you. Even then, survival was luck. I saw men lying flat in ditches struck by rounds that had already penetrated vehicles or ricocheted off roads. The bullets were still lethal after passing through metal and concrete. After 2 weeks of fighting in Normandy, our division would not move during daylight under any circumstances. Supplies came only at night. Reinforcements came only at night. Artillery repositioned only at night. We became a nocturnal army because the American aircraft owned the daylight, and those .50 caliber guns killed everything that moved. Units that violated this rule and attempted daylight movements suffered 40% to 60% casualties from air attack before they could take cover. We lost more vehicles to strafing than we lost to ground combat. The P-47 proved particularly effective in what American pilots called armed reconnaissance missions, essentially free-ranging hunter-killer patrols over assigned sectors. Rather than striking specific predetermined objectives, flights of 4 to 8 P-47s would patrol over German-held territory, looking for targets of opportunity. Any German vehicle moving during daylight risked attack. Any troop column. Any supply convoy. Any artillery position that revealed itself by firing. Any railway locomotive. Any command post identified by increased radio traffic or vehicle presence. The P-47 pilots would circle overhead like birds prey, watching for movement, then dive to attack with their 8.50 caliber machine guns. The ammunition capacity of the P-47, approximately 425 rounds per gun, 3,400 rounds total, allowed pilots to engage multiple targets during a single sortie. A pilot might strafe a convoy on his initial pass, expending 500 rounds, climb back to altitude and spot a German tank platoon moving into position, dive to attack them, expending another 800 rounds engaging the tanks and their supporting infantry, continue to patrol and spot a railway junction with locomotives, dive to attack the locomotives, expending another 600 rounds. Finally strafe a crossroads on a return flight to base, expend the remaining ammunition for targets engaged in a single 90-minute mission, all with the same 8.50 caliber machine guns that American factories had produced by the hundreds of thousands, supplied with ammunition that American industry produced by the billions of rounds. Major Heinrich Bär, 28 years old from Leipzig, was a Luftwaffe ace with 220 confirmed victories who survived the war. He had flown on every front against the French in 1940, in the Battle of Britain, on the Eastern Front, over the Mediterranean, and in defense of the Reich. He was one of the most experienced German fighter pilots to survive the war. In post-war interviews conducted in 1947, Bär described the tactical implications of American .50 caliber armament on fighter aircraft and the broader strategic impact. Our Bf-109G 6 carried one 20mm MG-151 cannon firing through propeller hub and two 13mm MG-131 machine guns mounted above the engine. Synchronized to fire through propeller arc. Total ammunition capacity was 150 rounds for the cannon and 300 rounds per machine gun. In combat, this gave us perhaps 12 to 15 seconds of firing time before ammunition exhaustion. We had to aim carefully, fire in short, precise bursts, make every shot count. The American P-47 carried 8.50 caliber machine guns with 425 rounds each. This gave them nearly 50 seconds of continuous firing time, more than 3 times our endurance. They did not need to aim carefully. They could fire long bursts, walk their fire onto targets, saturate an area with bullets, and guarantee hits through volume rather than precision. In air-to-air combat, this gave them an enormous advantage in deflection shooting. They could open fire at 600 meters, far beyond the effective range of their weapons, and walk their fire toward the target using tracers as aiming references. By the time their tracers reached the target, they had adjusted their aim, and the later rounds in the burst would hit. We had to wait until 300 meters to guarantee hits with our cannons, and by then we were inside the range where American pilots could hit us with volume fire. In ground attack, the difference was even more pronounced. We had to select targets carefully and disengage after a single attack run to conserve ammunition. Our ammunition capacity allowed for perhaps 2 or 3 effective strafing passes before we were Winchester out of ammunition. The Americans could engage multiple targets per sortie, firing long bursts at each target, and still have ammunition remaining for defensive use on the return flight. But the real difference was reliability. Our 20mm cannons jammed frequently. The MG-151 was relatively reliable, but the 108 Malawian Quach's 30mm cannon, which was powerful enough to destroy a bomber with 3 or 4 hits, jammed constantly. Perhaps one attack in 3, our cannons would fail. American pilots learned this. They learned that if they could survive our first burst, we might not get a second chance before our weapons failed. The American .50 caliber did not jam. I shot down 7 P-47s during the war. I saw many more damage and trailing smoke. I never saw a P-47's gun stop firing due to mechanical failure. They would fire until they ran out of ammunition, and they carried so much ammunition that reaching Winchester required sustained combat far beyond what our fuel capacity allowed. German forces adapted by moving primarily at night and in bad weather, conditions that limited American air operations. But this adaptation came at enormous cost to operational tempo and logistics. Supplies that should have taken 3 hours to move from core supply dumps to frontline units required 12 to 18 hours when movement was restricted to darkness. Reinforcements that should have arrived at the front within a day of being committed required 3 or 4 days of slow night movement. Artillery units that needed to reposition after firing to avoid counter-battery fire found themselves trapped in position during daylight hours, vulnerable to air attack if they moved, but also vulnerable to American artillery if they remained stationary, and their position was identified. The Luftwaffe's inability to contest American air superiority by mid-1944 meant that German ground forces operated under constant threat of air attack. Fighter cover over German positions was rare and brief. The Americans had achieved air supremacy. Not just superiority, but complete dominance. German units knew that any movement during daylight would draw air attack within minutes. The response time from American forward air controllers calling in strikes to P-47s arriving on target was as little as 15 to 20 minutes. German forces had no effective counter to this capability. The combination of ground-mounted and air-delivered .50 caliber fire created comprehensive suppression across the entire depth of the battlefield. German units could not move safely in daylight because of strafing attacks. They could not move safely at night because American ground forces used reconnaissance by fire with vehicle-mounted .50 calibers to interdict roads and trails. They could not concentrate forces for counterattacks because American doctrine called for immediate engagement of any identified German formation with all available firepower, including .50 caliber machine guns that could fire continuously while artillery and air support were being coordinated. This was a reality that broke German combat effectiveness in the West. Not a single decisive battle, not a wonder weapon, but the cumulative weight of facing an opponent whose basic heavy machine gun was present in such overwhelming quantities and employed so lavishly that traditional military responses became irrelevant. July 25, 1944, 9:38 hours. Operation Cobra. St. Lo, France. General Major Fritz Bayerlein, 45 years old from Würzburg, commanded the Panzer Lehr Division, one of the Wehrmacht's elite armor formations and perhaps the best-equipped division in the German army. Bayerlein was no stranger to combat or responsibility. He had served as chief of staff to Erwin Rommel in North Africa, fought at Alamein, commanded armored units in Italy, and earned the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, one of Germany's highest military decorations. His division held defensive positions south of St. Lo, blocking the American breakout from a Normandy beachhead. Panzer Lehr had approximately 11,000 men, 183 tanks, and assault guns, including 37 Panthers and a company of Tiger tanks, and was considered one of the most combat-capable units available to defend against Allied offensives. At 9:38 hours on July 25th, Bayerlein was in his command post when the first wave of American heavy bombers appeared overhead. What followed was the most concentrated aerial bombardment in support of ground operations up to that point in the war. Over the next 110 minutes, 1,800 heavy bombers and 550 fighter bombers dropped approximately 3,300 tons of high explosive and fragmentation bombs on German positions in a rectangular area measuring approximately 7,000 meters long by 2,500 meters wide. The bombing was supposed to strike only German positions beyond a road that marked the forward line of American troops. Navigation errors resulted in bombs falling short, striking American units and causing 111 American deaths, including Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, the highest-ranking American officer lost to enemy action in the European theater. But the bombing, devastating as it was, did not destroy Panzer Lehr. Bayerlein had dispersed his units into bocage terrain, small groups hidden in hedgerows, orchards, and sunken roads. Many positions survived the bombardment, their occupants disoriented and shocked but still combat-capable. Bayerlein's command post was buried under debris, but he survived. What destroyed Panzer Lehr was not the bombing. It was what came after. American armored divisions, the 2nd and 3rd Armored, along with the 1st Infantry Division, reinforced by separate tank and tank destroyer battalions, attacked through the bombed sectors starting at 11 o'clock hours. What Bayerlein's dazed and scattered troops encountered was not simply American tanks and infantry, but a mobile wall of firepower that never stopped, never slowed, never gave German forces time to organize effective resistance. Every American Sherman tank had an M2 Browning .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret roof. Every M10 and M18 tank destroyer had a .50 caliber. Every M8 armored car had a .50 caliber. Every M3 half-track carrying infantry had a .50 caliber on a ring mount. Even the jeeps carrying forward observers and company commanders had .50 calibers on pedestal mounts. The American columns advanced with every weapon firing continuously, a tactic called marching fire, suppressing any position before it could engage effectively. Lieutenant Karl Schmidt, 24 years old from Munich, commanded a Panther tank in the 130th Panzer Regiment. His tank survived the bombing, hidden in an orchard south of the target zone. When American forces advanced, Schmidt moved his Panther into a hull-down position behind a hedgerow to engage American Shermans. What happened next changed his understanding of armored warfare. His account comes from interrogation reports after his capture on July 29th. I had an excellent firing position. My Panther's 75mm gun could penetrate any American tank at ranges up to 2,000 meters. I had 5 rounds of armor-piercing ammunition loaded and ready. I identified 3 Sherman tanks approaching on the road, perhaps 800 meters distant. I prepared to engage. Before I could fire, the Americans opened fire with their machine guns. Not at my tank. They had not seen me yet, but at the hedgerows and buildings on both sides of the road. Continuous fire for what looked like 20 or 30 machine guns, all firing at the same time. The noise was incredible. The tracers looked like streams of light. They were not aiming at specific targets. They were simply saturating the entire area with fire. I watched through my periscope as .50 caliber rounds hit the hedgerow in front of my position. The branches were cut away. Small trees fell. I realized that if I raised my head above the hedgerow to acquire a better sight picture, I would be hit immediately. The volume of fire was so intense that exposure meant certain death. I made the decision to engage from my concealed position, using only the periscope for aiming. I fired 1 round, hit a Sherman in the front slope, not a penetration but a solid hit. The Sherman stopped. The other American tanks immediately traversed their turrets toward my position. But more importantly, every machine gun in the column, and there were many, many machine guns, opened fire on a hedgerow where my tank was hidden. The .50 caliber fire was not effective against my Panther's armor. The rounds could not penetrate, but they destroyed my vision. The periscope was hit and shattered. The driver's vision blocks were hit. The commander's cupola vision blocks were hit. Within 30 seconds, I was blind. I could not see to aim. I could not see to move. I was trapped in an undamaged tank that had been rendered combat ineffective by machine gun fire. I ordered my crew to abandon the tank, and we escaped on foot. I learned later that American forces destroyed my Panther with thermite grenades after they advanced past our position. The tank was mechanically perfect, fully armed, fully fueled, but it had been defeated by machine guns that could not penetrate its armor, simply by blinding it and rendering it unable to fight. This pattern repeated across the entire Cobra battlefield. German tanks that survived the bombing and were still mechanically functional found themselves unable to engage effectively because of sustained .50 caliber fire that destroyed optical equipment, damaged external systems, and forced tank commanders to button up, sealing themselves inside their tanks with severely limited visibility. But the greater impact was on German infantry and supporting units. Bayerlein watched his division disintegrate over 3 days of fighting, not primarily from tank engagements or artillery, though those were significant factors, but from the cumulative effect of constant .50 caliber fire that prevented his forces from maneuvering, from concentrating, from mounting coordinated counterattacks. Infantry units that tried to reposition during the American advance were caught in the open by reconnaissance by fire from advancing American vehicles. Artillery units that revealed their positions by firing were immediately engaged by .50 caliber fire from American tanks and infantry, forcing crews to take cover and abandon their guns. Supply vehicles attempting to bring ammunition forward were destroyed by marching fire from American columns. In his post-war memoirs written for the United States Army Historical Division, Bayerlein provided one of the most detailed German command-level analyses of American firepower doctrine. By the time my division retreated from the St. Lo sector on July 28th, it had ceased to exist as a combat-effective formation. I had started the battle with approximately 11,000 men and 183 armored vehicles. 3 days later, I could account for perhaps 2,200 effective soldiers and fewer than 40 operational tanks and assault guns. We had not been defeated in a decisive battle. We had been ground down through continuous attrition. The Americans had solved the fundamental problem of modern warfare. They had found a way to project superior firepower without requiring superior training or tactics. Their .50 caliber machine guns, mounted on every vehicle and operated by soldiers with minimal specialized training, supplied with vast quantities of ammunition that seemed to never run out, create a baseline of firepower that my forces, even my elite, well-trained veteran forces, could not match with our more sophisticated weapons and better-trained crews. I had commanded some of the finest troops in the Wehrmacht. These were veterans of North Africa and the Eastern Front. I had excellent equipment, including Panther and Tiger tanks that were technically superior to anything the Americans fielded. Our infantry were better trained in small unit tactics. Our machine gun crews were specialists with years of experience. Our artillery was accurate and effective when we had ammunition to fire. But none of this mattered when American forces could bring overwhelming firepower to bear on any position, instantly and continuously, with weapons that functioned reliably in all conditions. It was not that we fought poorly. We fought well. Individual units achieved local tactical successes, ambushing American patrols, knocking out isolated vehicles, holding critical positions longer than the Americans expected. But these successes were meaningless in the context of sustained attrition warfare, where the Americans could afford to lose 3 tanks to destroy one of ours, could afford to expend 10,000 rounds of ammunition to kill 20 soldiers, could afford to make tactical mistakes, and simply overwhelm those mistakes with raw firepower. The .50 caliber machine gun was a foundation of American tactical superiority, not because it was an exceptional weapon, though it was reliable and effective, but because it was everywhere, always available, always applied with sufficient ammunition that American commanders never needed to make the agonizing decisions about fire discipline that German commanders faced every day. December 16th, 1944, 5:30 hours. The Ardennes Forest, Belgium and Luxembourg. The German offensive achieved complete tactical surprise. American forces in the Ardennes sector were either green divisions that had never seen combat or exhausted divisions pulled back for rest after heavy fighting in the Hürtgen Forest. German planners had chosen the sector precisely because it was lightly held, for American divisions defending an 85-kilometer front, and because of the rain and weather were considered unsuitable for major operations. For the first 48 hours, it appeared the German gamble might succeed. American units fell back in confusion. German armor advanced rapidly on some routes, penetrating 15 to 20 kilometers into American-held territory. The weather was terrible, fog, snow, and low clouds that grounded American aircraft and negated Allied air superiority. But German planners had made one critical miscalculation. They had assumed that bad weather would neutralize American air power and reduce the effectiveness of American material advantages, bringing the battle down to a level where German tactical superiority and veteran troops could achieve decisive success. They were only half right. Weather did ground American aircraft initially, eliminating the devastating P-47 strikes that had terrorized German forces since Normandy. But weather did not affect ground-mounted .50 caliber machine guns, and American logistics could sustain ammunition expenditure at rates the Germans found incomprehensible, regardless of weather conditions. At Bastogne, elements of the 101st Airborne Division and Combat Command B of the 10th Armored Division found themselves surrounded by German forces starting on December 20th. The Americans held the town with approximately 18,000 soldiers, facing more than 45,000 German troops from 7 divisions: the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, the Panzer Lehr Division, elements of the 2nd Panzer Division, and others. The siege of Bastogne became one of the most famous defensive actions in American military history, partly because of Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe's famous one-word response, "Nuts!" to German surrender demands on December 22nd. But what actually allowed the American defense to succeed was something less dramatic and more fundamental: logistics and firepower, centered on the .50 caliber machine gun. Oberstleutnant Ludwig Heilmann, 29 years old from Würzburg, commanded the 5th Fallschirmjäger Division during attacks on Bastogne. His division was composed of veteran paratroopers, some of the best infantry in the Wehrmacht. They made multiple attempts to break into the American perimeter between December 19th and December 26th. All failed with heavy casualties. After the war, Heilmann provided extensive testimony about the Bastogne fighting. "We attacked the American perimeter from a northwest sector on December 20th with 2 regiments, the 13th and 15th Fallschirmjäger regiments, approximately 3,000 men total. American artillery took a toll. That much was expected. But what stopped our attack was a machine gun fire. Not German-style machine gun fire, careful, disciplined bursts from concealed positions. Conserving ammunition, aimed fire at identified targets. This was American-style fire. Continuous, overwhelming, from dozens of positions simultaneously, seemingly without any concern for ammunition expenditure. The Americans had positioned .50 caliber machine guns at every potential avenue of approach into their perimeter. The weapons were dug in, with excellent fields of fire, supported by infantry with automatic weapons. As we advanced across open ground, there was no other approach in that sector. They opened fire at ranges of 600 to 800 meters. At that distance, our return fire with rifles and machine pistols was ineffective, but the .50 caliber rounds reached us with lethal effect. The volume of fire was such that my lead elements took 40% casualties before reaching 300 meters from the American positions, before reaching effective range for our own weapons. Men fell in groups, cut down by fire from positions they could not see through the snow and fog. The distinctive sound of the .50 caliber, deeper, slower rate of fire than our MG-42, but each individual shot audible as a separate impact, was everywhere. The Americans were firing continuously, long bursts of 20 or 30 rounds, and there seemed to be no pause to change barrels or reload ammunition. We took cover in shell holes and depressions. We tried to advance by infiltration, small groups moving while others provided covering fire, but the Americans adjusted. Any movement drew immediate fire from multiple .50 caliber positions. The snow offered no cover. Rounds would hit the frozen ground and ricochet unpredictably, or punch through snow drifts that appeared substantial but offered no protection. What broke the attack, what truly stopped us, was not just the casualties, but the realization among my soldiers that advancing meant certain death. These were veteran paratroopers who had fought at Monte Cassino, at Anzio, in Normandy. They were not cowards. They understood what combat required, but they also understood mathematics. The Americans were firing thousands of rounds per minute from heavy machine guns that could penetrate any cover we tried to use. Our doctrine called for advancing under fire, close with the enemy, defeating them in close combat, where German training and aggression gave us advantages. That doctrine assumed the enemy would eventually run out of ammunition, or that we could suppress their fire with our own weapons while assault elements advanced. The Americans never ran out of ammunition. Over 3 hours of sustained combat, I never heard a pause in their fire that lasted more than a few seconds. And we could not suppress dozens of .50 caliber machine guns with the rifles and MP-40 machine pistols our paratroopers carried. We broke off the attack at 15:30 hours. Casualties were 43% for the units that had been committed, 1,290 men killed, wounded, or missing from the 2 regiments. American casualties in that sector, as we learned later, were fewer than 200. The casualty exchange ratio was completely unsustainable. When weather cleared on December 23rd and American aircraft returned to the battle, the combination of air-delivered and ground-mounted .50 caliber fire made continued German offensive operations impossible. P-47 Thunderbolts flying close air support missions strafed German columns on approach roads to Bastogne. C-47 transport aircraft dropped supplies to the surrounded garrison, including thousands of rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. American armored units of the 4th Armored Division, pushing north to relieve Bastogne, advanced with every .50 caliber firing in marching fire, suppressing German positions that might otherwise have contested the relief corridor. Major Heinz Kokott, 41 years old, from Essen, commanded the 26th Volksgrenadier Division during the Bulge offensive. His division attacked American positions south and southwest of Bastogne repeatedly throughout late December, attempting to tighten the encirclement and prevent relief. In post-war interrogations, Kokott described the cumulative psychological impact of American firepower. After 1 week of offensive operations, my division had suffered 3,400 casualties, nearly 40% of our combat strength. Of these casualties, I estimate that fewer than 800 were from American artillery or tank fire. The vast majority, perhaps 2,000 or more, were from small arms fire, and of those, most were from .50 caliber machine guns based on wound patterns reported by medical personnel. The psychological effect was as destructive as the physical casualties. My soldiers, many of them young replacements who had received minimal training, rushed to the front to fill gaps in veteran units. Learned within days that any movement in view of American positions meant death or mutilation. They would not leave cover, during daylight. They hesitated to advance even when ordered by their officers. I do not attribute this to cowardice, but to a rational calculation that any soldier would make. The Americans would fire thousands of rounds at any target. They had unlimited ammunition by German standards. They never needed to conserve fire or choose targets carefully. Any German soldier who exposed himself would be engaged by multiple machine guns simultaneously. Survival was not a matter of tactical skill or courage, but of pure chance. And chance favored the side that could afford to fire 100 rounds to kill one enemy. My officers reported that even veteran soldiers were becoming reluctant to advance under these conditions. These were men who had survived years of combat on the Eastern Front, who had faced Soviet artillery barges and tank attacks. But there was something uniquely demoralizing about the American firepower. The Soviets would barrage a position with artillery, then assault with infantry. The barrage would end, and you could fight back. The Americans would fire continuously, from the beginning of an engagement until its end. There was never a moment when their fire slackened, never an opportunity to counterattack while they reloaded or repositioned. The Battle of the Bulge ground down German offensive capability through a combination of factors: American artillery, air power once weather cleared, armor engagements where American numerical superiority eventually told, and logistics. But underlying all of these factors was the baseline of .50 caliber fire that made German tactical maneuvers prohibitively costly. German forces could achieve local tactical successes through surprise or superior positioning. A Panzer team might knock out a Sherman tank. A well-positioned MG-42 crew might stop an American infantry probe. German artillery, when ammunition was available, could disrupt American movements. But these successes were temporary and unsustainable because American forces could mass firepower and sustain it indefinitely. The tactical equation was brutally simple. German forces could win individual engagements, but would lose sustained battles of attrition. And the .50 caliber machine gun ensured that every engagement became a battle of attrition, where American material superiority proved decisive. By January 1945, as American forces counterattacked and pushed German units back toward the German border, the pattern was irreversible. German forces could no longer conduct offensive operations on any significant scale. They were reduced to defensive warfare, trading space for time, hoping that American casualties would mount to politically unsustainable levels before Germany was completely overrun. But even defensive warfare required maneuver, counterattacks, repositioning of forces to meet threats. And all of these actions brought German forces under .50 caliber fire that inflicted steady, grinding casualties. The .50 caliber machine gun was a foundation of American tactical capability. It was present in sufficient quantities to engage any target. It was reliable enough to fire continuously for hours without jamming. It was supplied with sufficient ammunition that American commanders never needed to ration fire. And it was employed according to doctrine that valued suppression and destruction over conservation and precision. March 1945. The Rhine River crossings and the final campaigns into Germany. General der Fallschirmtruppe Alfred Schlemm, 52 years old, from Berlin, commanded the 1st Parachute Army, defending the western approaches to the Rhine. Schlemm was a capable officer who had managed to conduct an effective fighting retreat through the Netherlands despite being outnumbered and under constant air attack. He had received the Knight's Cross with oak leaves for his defensive operations. When American forces began crossing the Rhine at multiple points in March 1945, Schlemm faced an impossible situation. His army had been ground down to approximately 40% of authorized strength. Ammunition was scarce. Artillery batteries were rationed to 10 shells per gun per day. Fuel was practically non-existent. Vehicles were being pulled by horses or abandoned. Air support was a fantasy. The Luftwaffe had ceased to exist as an effective force, with fewer than 2,000 operational aircraft remaining in all of Germany, most grounded by fuel shortages. But what made defense truly hopeless was not German weakness, but American strength. Specifically the omnipresence of .50 caliber machine guns at every level of American tactical operations. American engineers building pontoon bridges across the Rhine worked under protection of .50 caliber machine guns positioned on both banks, firing continuously at any suspected German position that might threaten the crossing sites. American assault boats crossing the river had .50 caliber machine guns mounted on improvised pintles, firing as the boats made the crossing to suppress German defensive positions. American tanks and tank destroyers on the West Bank provided covering fire with their .50 calibers, engaging German positions on the East Bank at ranges up to 1,500 meters. Oberstleutnant Werner Schultz, 26 years old from Hamburg, commanded a company of the 7th Parachute Division attempting to contest American crossings near Wesel. He was captured on March 24, 1945, after his position was overrun by British and American forces during Operation Plunder. His interrogation described the impossibility of effective defense against American crossing operations. We were ordered to prevent American crossings at all costs. This was fantasy, divorced from reality. The Americans had more machine guns on one bank of the river than my entire regiment had rifles. They fired continuously, not at specific targets we had revealed by firing, but at the entire riverbank. Systematic, methodical fire that swept across every position, every trench, every bunker. Any position that revealed itself by firing at American crossing attempts would be engaged by dozens of .50 caliber machine guns within seconds. The fire was so intense that our soldiers could not raise their heads to aim properly. They would fire blindly over the tops of their positions, spray ammunition in the general direction of American forces, then take cover as return fire shredded everything above ground level. I had 140 men in my company at the start of the Rhine defense operations on March 22nd. After 3 days of continuous combat, I had 31 effective soldiers who could still fight. Most casualties were from .50 caliber fire, either from ground-based machine guns or from aircraft strafing our positions. We could not move during daylight. We could not reposition our weapons. We could not conduct coordinated counterattacks. All we could do was hide in our positions and hope the Americans did not identify our exact locations.